My name is Jorge Gastelumendi. I'm the senior director of the, I'm going to walk here, so I'm not in the corner. I'm the senior director of the Climate Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is a foreign affairs think tank based in Washington, D.C. That's where I live, that's where I come from today. And with a Global Resilience Partnership, we've been co-organizing and co-managing the Resilience Hub since Glasgow in COP 26, 2020, 2021. And this idea of the hub has always been to bring actors that were dispersed in the ecosystem, bring them together under a house, and a strategic partnership with UN high-level climate champions, and the Race to Resilience that we developed over time, a set of actors. Today, we're going to have a panel that it's a Shark Tank panel, and I don't know if you've seen the show before, but the Shark Tank is basically people come with their pitches, and then you have a set of judges that are vying to get a equity piece of that business and to buy into that business. So we're gonna shift the order of things in terms of, the ones that are gonna be doing the business pitch are gonna be governments. And the sharks are gonna be private sector that are gonna sit in there trying to understand whether they want to pitch in, to buy into those pitches that are being heard by, put out by the governments. So it's gonna be quite a interactive session. Let's see. And with that, I wanted to introduce you to Dan Yoshpe, who is a COP30 high-level champion. And he's going to give us opening remarks. And then as soon as he's done, I'll invite all the panelists to come in, and we'll start with the exercise. Thank you.
I have the same tie as in the picture, as you can see, so I'm very systematic. I would like to use my time here today to talk mostly about the connection of all this subject with our climate action agenda for COP30 and hopefully for the next few years from a strategy and architecture standpoint. We started to talk at COP30 about implementation. That's a very center place for us, and we want the action agenda to be the stage of the whole event. And then we said, well, adaptation needs to be at the same level as mitigation, so that's another very important condition. And then we draw those 6 axes, 5 vertical axes and 1 horizontal axis that talk directly to the global stocktake, and where we have this combination of mitigation subject, adaptation subjects, resilience, transition, and the enabling factors, and a lot of them connect, of course, to each other, and that's good for synergy and for more efficiency in the process. And how can we connect NAPs and other instruments with the action agenda and be very close to the ground, very effective, very practical, very pragmatic? That's our real objective on this cycle. And I believe if we do a good job, that could be a continuous effort for many years to come, hence allowing us to deliver, to implement more. So another important point, because we are very focused on what I just said, we are not bringing any new initiative or new pledge from the presidency, from the climate champions team, and we are working very close to UNFCCC, Marrakesh Partnership, and all the entities involved in this process. And of course, we are not in a position, and we are not interested in blocking any new initiative. That's not the point. But we are not the ones proposing, because we believe that if implementation is the story. To work on existing initiatives will be much more effective than to come up with new ones and take all the effort from zero to bring them in. And of course, because of the quality and the relevance of these initiatives, which were built over 10 years or more by people like you and others that took a lot of time to bring them up and to check their relevance. So through this process, we have created this 30 activation groups. One group that talks very much to this specific subject. Hopefully I don't get the numbers wrong. I have 30 numbers in my head, but it's number 21. And Marcia here, if you can stand up, Marcia, please. Marcia from the Climate Champions team is very much within this group. And I asked her to stand up because for whoever doesn't know her or her involvement with Activation Group 21, she's the right person on earth to talk to and make sure that you are within this activation group effort one way or another, directly or indirectly, because that's really what this process is supposed to be about a mutirão, a place where everybody works together towards a common goal, each one in its own speed and way, but that we move forward and towards achieving our common objectives. So hopefully, by doing this, we'll be able to level in a better way the adaptation subject overall, the financing and the resources, which are still very much less than what we see for other areas, the private participation, which is also very important. We need to multiply at least by 5 the size of the private participation in this effort to bring it up to around 15%, from 3 to 15. So we're not saying that we're going to take the major part on it, but we need to do a significant effort to be in a better position. And we need a lot of resources to cope with climate change and to do a good job in this front. Of course, one part which I would not say it is interesting because it doesn't come from the right place, but it's a fact, is that adaptation is a sizable business by now. It's probably one of the biggest business opportunities of our times, not for the right reasons, but it is positive that we move quickly and forward in this direction, because that will save lives or will make better the quality of living of all those involved. And effectively, the issues will occur on more densely populated areas of the world with less socioeconomic development. So unfortunately, most of the issues will occur with the people that have less condition to absorb these problems. So that's why it is, of course, critical and crucial that we increase our efforts in the adaptation and resilience arena, in the cities, in the housing, in the early warning systems, and in so many other initiatives that are within, I was mentioning in the beginning, sorry, this structure of the action agenda where we have 30 key objectives, 30 activation groups. Of course, the group 21 is very focused on finance for adaptation, but there are 2 axes which are very much devoted to the adaptation and resilience subject, besides the other 3 axes where we do have also very common issues, and this horizontal 6-axis where the activation group 21 lies, and where we have a lot of relevant issues that cross there as well. So the call for action here is to be, of course, participant, to get involved in, at least in this activation group, if not in others that you believe that you have value on adding there. And let's hope that this cycle of COP30 can be the beginning of a more down-to-the-ground, very practical, pragmatic way of doing the climate action agenda, where we implement a lot and we use these activation groups every day. That's my personal desire here, that we have no stop and go, and that we work 360 days per year throughout the years, using the activation groups to debottleneck all the issues that we have in front of us. Of course, in all the areas, I'm putting a lot of effort here into the adaptation front, but of course it works for every area. Of course, again, we are not in a position to force that over time, but if we do a good job at COP30, and if we show this process fairly well to the subsequent presidencies over time, I believe most probably we can have a continuation which could be very positive for the work that everyone is doing, so that we don't have stop and goes and lose and loss of efficiency in the process. So hopefully I shared with you a bit of our view for the COP30, the implementation subject, the one only unified climate action agenda, the relevance of adaptation vis-a-vis the other themes that we have there, how to participate, and the relevance of the non-public engagement, either on financing, on solutions, on implementation, and in all the other areas, so that at the end of the day, NAPS is not a document in the binder or in the bookshelf, but it's really very close to what we will be doing in the activation groups, and those things connect a lot. And finally, if this route works fine, and I believe it will, this is the agenda for the negotiators. So whatever is our bottleneck, that's exactly what we would need, specific country or regions or worldwide, to be debating and using this amazing cycle that we have every year between COP, events, gatherings, to really stay as close as possible to the ground, to the effective needs that we have to move forward with so many important objectives that are all clear to us, all within the global stocktake, where we have technologies, where we have good ways to solve, and hopefully this more detailed approach will be supportive to get them going and scale them up as quick as possible. So thank you so much, and very eager to see the Shark Tank, Jorge. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there are no silver bullets for solving the climate adaptation and resilience challenge that we have in the world. But if anything comes close to a silver bullet, are the national adaptation plans that were set out through hard consultations, hard negotiations over time in the UNFCCC process. Now, NAPS could be seen as a forcing mechanism, as a market signal, something that changes the way people think about investing on climate adaptation. But only 30% of countries around the world have developed national adaptation plans. So 60 out of almost 200 countries. First of all, why is that? We'll need to answer that question. But second is, out of those 60, very few of them have been able to transform those plans into investable pipelines. So there's another, glitch in the system. Today, we're going to discuss, and we're going to invite the panelists soon. We're going to discuss how those national adaptation plans actually could become those investable mechanisms that allow for private sector, public sector to come in and start reining into investing on adaptation. And so the questions that we have put into the two main keynote speakers that we're going to have today are, first, how are you developing those national adaptation plans in a way in which you're advancing those investment plans? And second, how are you engaging the private sector? Those are the two big questions that we're going to put out. And with that, let me invite the panel to come in, and also let me invite Secretary Gillian Martin. She's the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy Government of Scotland. Thank you so much for being with us. Panelists, please come into the to the stage. Grab your seat. And Secretary, you're going to be here. If you want to walk, you can also walk. Yes. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to speak to you about the opportunity to invest in Scotland's National Adaptation Plan, or SNAP as we call it. Scotland's already cut its emissions by 50% from a 1990 baseline, and we're now accelerating our efforts and also focusing on the economic benefits that come with that just transition at the same time. We know that past emissions have locked in severe climate impacts. We know what they are: the rising sea levels, the extreme interestingly, also economically. And done right, it's not just the right things to do, it's a smart financial decision. Adaptation is complex. There are no singular targets, it's all context, it's very site-specific. Responsibilities span sector, society, levels of government, and from national to local to community level. That complexity can make it difficult for private investors to engage confidently. So that's why Scotland's National Adaptation Plan, SNAP 3, sets out a clear vision for a well-adapted Scotland. It's an ambitious strategy. It's got over 200 policy commitments. It's got tackling climate risks across our economy, our environment, our communities, our public services, and our infrastructure. It assigns strong leadership across the public sector for each delivery objective, includes robust monitoring framework to track progress and to measure impact. Every part of society is pulling in the same direction. It is the only way to make this work. Our statutory advisors, the Climate Change Committee, praised our SNAP 3 as a strong strategic framework and a clear ambition for climate adaptation. And this clarity on who is doing what and by when sends a clear message and lays the foundation for greater investor confidence. At its core, SNAP 3 is built on collaboration. Climate impacts cascade through communities and markets. They create risks, but they also create opportunities that require action from both public and private actors. So we've set out our priorities at government and public sector level, but we believe it is time for private sector to realise its role and to embrace the many economic opportunities and investment opportunities that we have set out. Adaptation needs are rising, as I've said, but investment opportunities are also rising too. We are increasing public investment in critical infrastructure, so we're playing our part with how we spend our money too. We are spending money on flood defences to upgrades of rail, road networks. We are protecting our coastlines from erosion. But these efforts don't just protect public assets, they safeguard private sector operations too. The supply chains and the productivity associated with that could be impacted if we don't act. Private sector needs to act too. You need to climate-proof your investments, consider the physical climate risks when allocating your capital, and protect your assets for the challenges that we're facing. So early adaptation measures, so let's just take one example, like green roofs. Reduce overheating, proven cost benefits. They deliver £2 to £10. I don't know what that is in dollars, but £2 to £10. I don't know what the exchange rate is today, but that's for every single pound invested. There's also a growing market opportunity. The world needs adaptation solutions, goods, services, technologies. The innovation surrounding this is a great challenge and, as well as an opportunity, where private innovation is absolutely key. Nature-based solutions are central to adaptation and deliver cross-sector benefits. And in Scotland, we're taking action to unlock private investment in nature restoration in particular. Our natural capital market framework sets out the foundation for high-integrity markets. We understanding that de-risking, scale and returns absolutely matter. That's why we are developing investable, blended finance models such as peatland restoration pilots. I just want to talk a little bit Scotland's peatlands as a particularly interesting example of an opportunity. They are effectively, our peatlands have the potential to be the lungs of Europe. 30% of them are healthy, 70% of them present an opportunity for re-wetting, both stopping emissions but also sequestering carbon. And just as an interesting fact, we have the only UNESCO World Heritage Site which is a peatland in the Flow Country as well. So we have a nature restoration investment prospectus, new market mechanisms like an ecosystem restoration code, and biodiversity credit to attract capital into a broader range of habitats. Climate change is already costing the public and the private sector millions and potentially billions of pounds. But Scotland is accelerating climate adaptation action. We deliver policy clarity, strong public investment, and world-class natural assets. Now is the time to align investment strategy with climate resilience, for both impact and return, and we invite you to be part of our journey. Thank you.
That was excellent. Good pitch. And I know that you're going to have to leave at some point, so thank you for being with us, and hopefully you can see the scores that they're going to put. So let me explain the exercise, and while the panelists are working on the exercise, I'll share their names. So the exercise, you see that each of the panelists have a little palette under them. They're going to score the pitch from 1 to 5, 5 being the best. And then I'm going to go in rounds asking them why they put 5 or 2 or 1, hopefully not 1, and try to get an understanding of why from the private sector perspective, from a multitude of experiences here, they see that there might be some areas of improvement, of opportunities that might be helpful to have at hand and present. So while the panelists are doing that, I'm going to introduce them. And again, thank you for being here. So I'm going to start from left to right, since I'm a lefty. Peter Setterly is climate lead for CGAP. Ms. Vedika Vandarkar, she's the president and COO of water.org. Ms. Anuja Jaitley, she is the global business development for Blue Marble. Darío Soto Abril, executive director of Trafigura Foundation. We have Christopher Adamo. He's the head of global sustainability, impact, and B Corp for Danone. And then finally, we have Wim van den Hoek, co-head of emerging markets debt for Invesco. So with that, I hope that you had enough time to think about your score. And let me know when you're ready. All of you are ready? Yeah. Okay, so you can raise your score and show it to the public. There are no half points. I don't know what you're doing. Okay, so now we're going to start from right to left. So, Win. Why 3.5? That's closer to 5 than to 1, so that's a good start.
Thank you. Look, obviously, in the 4 or 5 minutes, it's hard to really share a lot of detail that people like myself would be looking for, right? So it's a first observation. A little bit background very quickly. I've been looking at sustainable investing mostly in emerging markets over the last couple of years. Now, what I did is I kind of divided up amongst various sub-factors. And the sub-factors that I think are important, obviously the impact, the longevity, is it verifiable, right? Simplicity, because that's something that I really come across when I have to look my end investors in the eye, is how can I explain this and is it simple enough? And then there's a category others of how does this kind of integrate with the rest of government? Are there other ways of facilitating some of these actions as well, right? So I scored it 3 on impact just as a general, because I didn't get that much detail, but there's also not that much time, I understand. I do actually scored it higher for I guess the trust and the creditworthiness of the region, both for longevity and verifiable. Simplicity, it seemed a little bit, I was a little confused, but that may be just me, and I want to be corrected by my colleagues here, and other probably a little lower. So that's how I got to 3.5.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thanks for modeling the amount of time that we will, expect from each of the panelists. Short and sweet, direct to a point. Why 3.5? What is missing? And remember that broader 2 questions are these NAPs? Sound like NAPs that are investable? Like people will be drawn towards those. And second, how is the private sector being engaged, and whether that's clear or there are clear paths or plans for doing that. So Chris.
Yeah, I'll be very direct here. So work for Danone, a food company. So thinking about this through a couple different lenses. One is agriculture, obviously our supply chain that's critical to us, and also water use, which comes about both in agriculture and at our plants. So you hit a couple, 3 actually areas that were of interest to me. One, talking about data collection, which I think is a central government role that governments often are very good at, providing data for the public, whether it be water use, flood zones, things of that nature. Also thinking about landowner incentives, you talked about nature-based solutions, so those things are interest to us. I wanted to know more about, what is the incentive exactly for the landowner? How could a company like ours potentially partner with to match a dollar, match a pound, for example, with your government? So I think, again, short time, would love to know more. But you hit some key pieces. And then the other piece, infrastructure, of course, a very broad word. There's a lot there. Would love to know more about what that might mean for a company like us. But the nature-based solution piece also I would put under the infrastructure bucket. So you hit a number of key pieces that we're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm an impatient philanthropist, and that's because my funders are much more impatient. They're traders. So 5 minutes is a lot, actually. I actually have 2 minutes to present this idea to them. So investable, really no. I mean, I'm curious about the return of investment for an investor. And yes, you mentioned the 2 to 10 leverage, thing that I hear in all of the meetings that I am going, but no one explained to me what does it mean for my company or for a company. It looks nice, 2 to 10, because it's going to rain less, etc. But it looks very general. Of course, you're the Scottish government, so there's an interest in partnering with you. It's a serious government. Your experience precedes you, but we're running on your experience and your name, basically. But investable, no. The other thing that I want to know is, I like the idea of the project with the pigeons or something like that you mentioned. I think that's one example, but I need a menu of investable programs. I cannot just run when, we have to save the world in 20 years. I want to save the world now, and I want to have investable projects now. Third, I want to know who's the CFO behind this program. Who's the accountable person that I'm going to call when something goes wrong? Because again, governments, a lot of offices, but I don't know who's responsible for what, so, and when. And I want to make sure that my dollars or pounds, the pound that I invest returns me or unlocks 10 more. And I want to know how is that going to happen. So I gave it a 3 because, again, the Scottish government, I want to be a partner with the Scottish government. It's not any government. But I would like, precisely because this is the Scottish government and you're leading the pack, I want to see more specificity.
So now we know next time the pitch needs to be a bit longer.
Thank you. Hello? Perfect. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really wonderfully presented. I gave it a 4. I'm from Blue Marble, and so we design custom weather-based solutions for governments and other entities, both on the private and public sector. So when I think of it from our perspective, I'm trying to understand how we could support you. what could we offer you in order to realize this vision from an investment of time and resources? And the few things that came to me were, the first one, alignment across ministries. You mentioned that everyone is part of the process, but more clarity on how that alignment occurs, because often solutions are very much in the details. So that would be more helpful to better understand exactly how ministries are involved outside of your particular ministry. The second piece, I was very curious about the inclusivity piece. You spoke about many various projects, but in terms of parts of society, I was wanting to better understand how various parts of society would be included in your plan and how they may interact and benefit from the various activities you mentioned. And then the last piece, given our role, I wanted to hear more about how you were leveraging innovative finance mechanisms, whether they be parametric solutions, which is the work we do, but other innovative finance mechanisms in order to make all these investments much more investable and protect all of the various actors in terms of the sort of climate risk that may wipe out all these investments given what various events may occur. So, but thank you again.
Hi. So I represent water.org, so which is, I represent 3 organizations, a not-for-profit, an asset manager, and a project development company. I have to start by saying we do not work in Scotland, so I just want to be clear. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think it's really hard to try and get so much in 3 to 5 minutes, and I thought you did a great job. I think the things which stuck out to me were, you were very upfront about talking about benefits for protecting private sector investments. Also, very clear responsibilities on the public sector and increasing the investments. So that was also great. I think in terms of what, and I rated you 4. So I think maybe a couple of things which could be amplified is, one, where are the investment gaps and why those investments are not happening? So you sort of referenced it when you talked about the blended finance model and the peatland restoration, but maybe a little bit more on why that gap and what are the barriers which you're trying to solve. And similar to the point you made, I thought the inclusion lens was lacking. Yes, it's a developed country, but how do you make sure that people who are living in not so well-off conditions, because we know that climate change hits them the hardest, how is this plan really responding to their needs and not putting too much burden on them, which is what inevitably, unfortunately, a lot of plans do. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. My name is Peter. I'm from CGAP, which is a think tank in the World Bank focused on financial inclusion. So access to financing for low-income and vulnerable populations. So I think you know what I'm going to say about the inclusion point. But I gave it a 3. I also hesitated between 3 and 4. I was going to put 3.5, but I knew Jorge would shoot that down. So I gave it a 3 in the end. So our focus very much is on not $100 million adaptation investment projects, but on the $100 adaptation investments that people make for themselves. And that's the main thing that I sort of see lacking here as well. I love the pitch too. I think it was great, to the point, very compelling narrative. Heartfelt, I think you came across as genuine. You made the economic argument, which is very important, obviously. You acknowledged that it's complex and difficult, which is good to meet people where they are. There was a lot of clarity in who's doing what, even though at a high level, the role of public versus private. There were a few things I was looking for as well that were there. So data and information on risks and adaptation responses, very important for financial institutions, which is the lens that I'm taking here, right? You were clear on the policy commitments. You mentioned there were 200 specific ones that someone can go look up and see if they are relevant to their business. You talked about de-risking and blended finance, which is very important in this space for financial institutions to play the role that they need to play. So those things were all great. What I didn't see was any specifics for the financial industries. So again, in 3 to 5 minutes, how could you? But there's more that we could get into around innovative financing mechanisms, whether there's going to be support for financial institutions looking to develop better adaptation financing instruments for their clients, right? The individuals and households. Insurance and risk transfer for financial institutions, lending for these purposes, and so forth. But the big one, of course, for me is inclusion. I didn't hear the word, I didn't hear whose adaptation we're talking about, and we know what that tends to mean when it's not clear. It doesn't tend to mean the vulnerable at the bottom of the pyramid. The reality of climate finance is that less than 1% of climate finance is for adaptation with a focus on local communities. It's probably substantially less than that. And how much gets in the hands of vulnerable households and individuals is going to be some fraction of that. But that's where climate change is playing out, right? The World Bank just published numbers very recently showing that 1/3 of adults in low-income countries have personally experienced a climate shock in the last 3 years. And 1 in 3 people, right? 2/3 of those people lost income as a result. 3/4 of those people lost assets as a result. So a critical priority in all this has to be, how do we get money into those people's hands so that they can enact their own adaptation and resilience strategies? And that's a dimension that we just can't leave out, even in 3 minutes.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the panelists. And Secretary Martin, thank you so much for playing out this exercise. We appreciate that a lot. And with that, we're going to move to the second pitch. You can erase your previous numbers. Start from scratch. Thank you so much. And we're going to see a video. It's 2 videos, total of about 7 minutes. So that's the right amount of the pitch. But it's going to try to tackle first video, the first question, second video, the second question, of course. And the person that is delivering the video, she's not here in the audience, but she's Peruvian, as I am. So I'm going to sit there, and you're going to give the pitch back to me as if you were giving it to somebody. And yeah, so I at least share the nationality of the person who's going to be presenting. No. Ah, yeah, that's right. They won't be able to see it, but you can. Yeah, you can listen. You can listen. Yeah. Okay, so ready to go. Thanks, Karen.
In Peru, adaptation to climate change has historically been financed with national public resources and international cooperation. These funds have made it possible to advance in preliminary assessment, sectoral plans, and pilot projects. Nevertheless, the magnitude of the challenge demands that we go further. Currently, we face the accelerated retreat of Andean glaciers, increased pressures on the Amazon, water insecurity in both urban and rural areas, and direct risk to health, agriculture, and fisheries. In this context, our national adaptation plans must become instruments able to attract both public and private investments. One of the limitations in the development of our national adaptation plans was the unavailability of disaggregated information on climate change-related hazards at the subnational and local level, which limited the definition of measures at the territorial level. The main challenge globally is that many national adaptation plans across countries remain as only declarations. Therefore, we are working toward translating our national adaptation plans into concrete projects with clear goals and indicators that speak the language of investors. To achieve this, the Ministry of Environment of Peru has 3 strategic approaches. First, sectoral and territorial prioritization. We have identified critical adaptation measures in the sectors of water, agriculture, fisheries, health, and ecosystem. Each measure is backed by climate information and vulnerability analysis, so they can be transformed into fundable projects. For example, in the water sector, we have made progress in watershed management plans that integrate nature-based solutions with traditional infrastructure, ensuring that every dollar invested generates multiple returns in resilience. Secondly, the development of innovative financial instruments. We know that investors seek confidence and low risk. For this reason, we are exploring mechanisms such as climate guarantee funds, blended finance that combines public and private capital, and green credit lines within the national financial systems. In addition, we are aligning our development banking system with adaptation priorities so they can leverage large-scale private investment for climate change adaptation. And thirdly, the inclusion of diverse stakeholders in the design and implementation of the National Adaptation Plan. Our approach is broad-based governance, subnational governments, indigenous communities, academia, the banking sector, civil society, and business are all part of the process. At the same time, we are reviewing our public and private investment policies, incorporating climate risk management criteria into the environmental impact assessment of infrastructure, agriculture, and energy projects. This means that future investment must take into consideration resilience, creating a structural change in the way sources are allocated. Finally, we want to highlight that we already have experience in mobilizing finance. For example, through the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility, we have secured funding for adaptation projects in the agriculture and water sectors. And now we aim to expand this experience into a national portfolio that also integrates the private sector. Our outlook is clear. The National Adaptation Plan will not only be a document, but rather an investment tool for Peru's resilience. Thank you. For national adaptation plans to be effective, we need to build a solid alliance among the government, the private sector, civil society, and international cooperation. At the Ministry of Environment, we are convinced that adaptation is not an expense, it is a strategic investment that ensures long-term economic, social, and environmental stability. What do we expect from the private sector? First, patient and flexible capital. Many adaptation measures require longer return horizons than conventional investment. For example, restoring mountain ecosystems to secure water supply for cities may take years, but the benefits are reliable and sustainable. For this, we need investors willing to commit to projects that generate long-term stability. Secondly, financial and technological innovation. We want the private sector to help us to introduce parametric insurance for small farmers, green and blue bonds that include adaptation criteria and digital solutions for climate risk monitoring. These tools not only reduce vulnerabilities, they also open markets and generate new business opportunities. Third, strategic partnership in project implementation. We are not looking for a private sector that only provides funding from the outside, but for partners who actively participate in the implementation. For instance, agribusiness companies can co-finance adaptation measures in rural value chains, ensuring the sustainability of their own operations. Energy companies can invest in resilient infrastructure that guarantee continuity of service in the face of extreme events. From civil society and international cooperation, we expect technical support, capacity building and assistance in project structuring. Many times, the bottleneck is not the absence of funding, but the lack of projects ready for investment. In this matter, cooperating organizations play a fundamental role in developing mature project pipelines that can attract private capital. Our vision is that adaptation becomes fertile ground for innovation and investment. We want to build a portfolio of projects that demonstrates that investing in climate resilience is profitable. It protects infrastructure, reduces economic loss, prevents social conflicts, and improves the well-being of vulnerable communities. In this way, Peru's National Adaptation Plan will not only be a governmental strategy, but a collective platform that transforms vulnerability into opportunity and shows other countries that investing in adaptation is investing in a sustainable future.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm the Peruvian. Gonna sit here and see your scores, and we'll start from whoever is ready first. The 0.5 remains somehow. Okay, so why don't we start with Peter? Let's start in the other direction.
See? Yeah, thanks very much. I thought this was pretty good as well. Went into a bit more detail, and I heard a few more things than in the previous one. Yeah, maybe I should have given it a 4 as well. She mentioned specific adaptation measures, which is very important to helping financial institutions know what to finance. So she mentioned that we're working on sort of articulating what those are, prioritizing adaptation responses, which is very important. She talked about innovative financing, financial instruments, parametric insurance, green-blue bonds, all very important for financial institutions to engage in this space. She talked about de-risking, extremely important, guarantee funds, blended finance instruments, and so forth. She mentioned TA for innovative instruments, which is something that lenders need to develop the right kinds of financial solutions in this space that they're not familiar with. Again, my main issue with it, obviously, is the lack of inclusion. Again, I heard nothing about whose adaptation and whose resilience we are talking about. There was no real mention of households or individuals or how we are going to be able to reach them with financing or adaptation responses, or even catalyze responses from other actors like financial institutions to reach them in turn. So I find that to be a very significant lack in any plan. You can write the best plan you have, but if you leave that element out, I think I'm never going to give you more than a 3, frankly. So that's my take.
Yeah, so I gave it a 4. I thought the pitch was really good. Very focused on collaboration. I mean, collaboration theme came throughout. I love that water was up front. I'm a little biased, but often we see climate adaptation plans without mentioning water, which to me is very bizarre. I love that there was conversation about new infrastructure being climate resilient. I liked that domestic DFIs were mentioned. In fact, as an aside, last year we did the first ever blue bond in Peru, along with their DFI to raise 100 million soles for water and sanitation. I also loved that there were clear asks from both the private sector and from the civil society, so that was great. I think what was missing to me was, unlike in the first one, it wasn't very clear what the business opportunity is for the private sector. So there were a lot of clear asks, but hey, private sector, this is profitable for you. That was missing. inclusion lens. Yes, and especially Peru. I mean, come on, you have to have inclusion lens. That was missing. And then comparing it to Scotland, I think the other thing which was missing a little bit was, so what is the public sector committing to do differently compared to what they've been doing in the past, which is maybe clearer responsibility or more money or both. That was missing, according to me. Thanks.
I gave it a 4 as well. I think it was very specific. I think there were many things, as noted, that were called out specifically that are very helpful in terms of thinking through investment and solutions. I thought it was really helpful to identify private sector as partners, this collaborative aspect of investment along with many other requests that would support very maybe improved use of those investments. And I thought, and of course it called out innovative finance, which I appreciated giving our work in terms of different tools that are being considered as part of the adaptation plan. I think the two things that stood out to me, or three things maybe, one was the ROI, as mentioned. It was a bit unclear exactly what the return on investment would be, and I think from an investment point of view, it would be helpful to identify that more clearly. Inclusion was certainly an issue, but as that's been mentioned, I think I would mention it was a bit unclear to me how the private sector was, or the public sector was investing, as was clear in the Scotland one. I think came through a bit more clear in terms of what their investment is going to be supporting the private sector investment. And then the last part, I liked how collaborative it was in terms of many stakeholders, but I thought decision-making and who was in charge was slightly less clear in terms of who would be driving forward this agenda and would be a main point of contact for any private sector institution engaging with the government of Peru. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I gave it a 4 because I switched from the impatient Simon to the more Paula Abdul kind of approach, so being nice in my... First, I think very positive. I like the idea of mentioning sectors. I mean, water, agriculture, fisheries. I felt moved when they talk about the Amazon. Of course, it's Peru, but you're talking about the Amazon, which is super important. The mention of the disaggregated climate hazards that she made, I think that was a very powerful point as well. Somehow the mention of a $1 multiplier, although it was general, but at least there was an attempt to do that. I like the attempt also to, it gave me peace of mind as an investor when they mentioned that they have received funding from GCF and Jeff, because you know how almost impossible it is to get funding from these places. You get the funding when the climate change has already happened. But anyway, that's another point. And I like the fact that they talk about diverse stakeholders, even though they went down to the beneficiary, as you mentioned, which would have been nice. The mention of the working or doing this with subnational authorities, with indigenous, with the private sector. I think that was compelling to me. So I think that's a positive. What I would love to see more, then, to be positive, first, more data points. Okay, good to tell the stories. The stories are moving, but what is the real return of investment? How many projects are ready, investable right now? Which other companies maybe are you speaking to, or which other cases from the private sector? I also would like to have that element of the return of investment, very specific. And as a general point, what it tells me on my Paula Abdul kind of open is that the challenge here is that we have a divide, because I can see how it's difficult to translate from a government official to talk to the private sector. And I wonder if one of the lessons learned is maybe is that for this fora, for these kind of things, you need like a former CEO or a former purely private sector person leading, or at least being sent out to do the sale. Maybe you have a minister who is a career politician, but you have to have someone who is like a true core private sector at the core, who's able to sit with a CEO and say, yes, this is the ROI, these are the numbers of investment, these are the projects that we have ready, come and visit them tomorrow. So that would be my thing, but I'll give it a 4.
Yes, as I mentioned in the last one, so as an agri-food company, agriculture and water are a couple of the key buzzwords I look for. Obviously, it was loud and clear there, so it was super positive. Also, I think what was very attractive by her pitch was clearly they have a whole toolbox of options lined up. It'd be really interesting to obviously dive deeper into those. So I think, again, as a food company, it was a very attractive pitch. I would love to replicate that in about 4 or 5 other countries that we work in. It'd be great to see that similar sort of pitch. Obviously, she reiterated a couple times about their investment, wanting to invest in the agri world. I made one comment on I gave her a 4, so I thought it was overall very good. Clearly someone we'd want to sit down and talk to. I think if I were to dive that next level for agriculture, we'd want to think about a couple other things. So financing is available. Financing for us as a food company generally isn't the problem. We have access to capital. We have access to financing. What we need to see is the infrastructure for the farmers, right? We need to see technical assistance available for farmers. We need to see a financing available to those farmers. We don't typically like to be the pass-through. We don't want to handle money on behalf of farmers. We want to see that in institutions on the ground there. And frankly, a subsidy system that can work. And of course, all subsidies are sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're in between, but there needs to be a dedication by the government to support the farms. Sounds like there is. We'd want to obviously dig through that next layer. But overall, super attractive pitch.
Thank you. Well done. Now, I gave it a 4+. I'm not going to call it a 4.5. But I think it's fair because I have maybe a little bit more information than my fellow sharks here, because I've participated in some of the deals, and so I actually know the team as well, and so it's pretty impressive if you think about countries and plants, Chile and Peru are really way up there in what they've been able to kind of work out or work on and implement as well, right? I mean, they're very specific, as you mentioned. Some of the sensitivity analysis that they do is really impressive as well. And on the inclusion part, actually, the GCF or the partnership with the GCF is actually in these indigenous regions as well, and they truly actually, and maybe that is the one thing I really like, very similar to what Chile is doing, is if you look at the E and the S, of ESG. They try to really combine that. So if we invest in a project that is hydro-based, let's find a community where it actually benefits the locals as well, employment, not just cheaper energy, etc. So I think they do a really nice job with and are very methodical going about it as well, right? Setting up these partnerships, diversifying their investor base. The one thing that I maybe that is a struggle from my perspective is that there tend to be still, I mean, there's not enough inventory of projects, right? It would be nice once you have the credibility, can we kind of lever this, because the due diligence that I need to do becomes a lot more efficient a second, a third, a fourth time, right? And so that's maybe one diversifying away from just renewables into other categories, agriculture, which is actually on the GCF as well, right? That would be great. But yeah, no, I'm super happy with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more round of applause for that sharks, please. This was a great conversation, and I wanted to reflect on one thing, and we'll make one more round. This is probably going to be a bit more of an open dialogue, but still, we have about what is it? About 15 to 20 minutes to have a conversation, or should be done by 3:15. So the process of developing national adaptation plans, as I said at the beginning, it's been a mandated exercise provided by the Climate Convention. It's a vehicle that it's hopefully meant to be a blueprint for how adaptation could be deployed in countries. And yet, only a handful of countries have been able to develop those. One. Two, the investments are basically seen as investment that should be coming from international cooperation to developing countries for implementing adaptation, as opposed to mobilizing domestic public budgets and also mobilizing domestic private sector. So there is a huge disconnect, similar to what Rio was saying, between what the public is expecting for adaptation and whether you could bring business-like or business-minded actors that should be looking into adaptation as both a cost-saving opportunity, but also a business opportunity and revenue generator. And so over the past months, the COP30 presidency has singled out national adaptation plans and country platforms as a mechanism to advance adaptation finance. So much so that tomorrow there are 2 events organized by the COP presidency only on that, only on apps, literally. And so one of the ideas that have come out to the surface is there are about 9 different mechanisms that have been created over time to support countries on developing national adaptation plans, and yet we have all those challenges. So a big question is, whether the system is working or not, and certainly, I would say it's not working. So there are a couple of things that have been put on the table that I wanted to test with all of you for you to react. One is the idea of creating a mechanism within an existing facility, being that the Green Climate Fund that has a mechanism of readiness mechanism that has, for example, the GCF has $3 million per country for national adaptation planning, ready to go. And there are many countries that have access to that. Where that has translated, and this is not necessarily I'm not pointing the GCF, but whether that has translated into actual pipelines of investable projects, that's a big question. So thinking of an existing platform, being NDC partnership being our, and you embed a facility that what would do is to coalesce all those 9 different platforms that are running around trying to do adaptation planning and align them on how they can coordinate better on targeting specific elements of adaptation planning and implementation that are not working. A couple of things are not working in this assessment that you could do across the board. One is there are relatively enough resources to start the planning process, but certainly there are not enough resources to bring the right capacity to the table on those countries to actually deploy the planning exercise. So for example, thinking about embeds, people that could be deployed to those countries and work on a daily basis on that. Think about the possibility of having expert actors such as, for example, Blue Marble, I'm going to just point it out, that could be paid, who pays for that, that's a question, but be paid by a sort of facility or mechanisms that already exist to actually deploy the whole actuarial models, the whole risk analytic framework that needs to be embedded into doing an adaptation planning. At the end of the day, you're talking about risks, and the adaptation plans that are out there are not following mechanisms or methodologies that are well known by the private sector in terms of how to assess risk, and based on that, how to prioritize investments. So the first is that a mechanism that could coalesce all the different actors, identify the gaps on the support that these countries are needing, and then deploy that capacity. Second, how to bring, and this is just a direct pitch to the insurance sector, how can you bring the insurance sector into embedding their methodologies, risk analytics, data, and capabilities to support the national adaptation planning exercises? There are several actors out there from the insurance sector that are really have a huge appetite if they are paid, and that's a business-like language. If they are paid, they are willing to actually land into those countries and work with these public actors to develop risk management frameworks that would allow for all that information to be flow, and then start attending some of the problems that Peru was mentioning, for example. And the third is something that I think Anuja has mentioned a couple of times, that there's a lack of coordination mechanisms inside at the domestic level, at the country level, to develop those plans. Those are very much done from either the Ministry of Environment or certain level of coordination, but for sure, you're not bringing the regulators, the insurance regulators. You're not bringing the private sector itself is not being brought to the table. Communities, inclusion, indigenous communities, actors that are going to be the ones that are going to be suffering the brunt of climate change are not being brought to the table. There's a lack of platforms, coordinator platforms at the country level to develop those. And so I would just go back to the point. There are 3 layers, 3 gaps clearly identifiable in the system, even though you have 9 mechanisms around the world that are trying to support national adaptation plans. First, capacity building is not there. It's not being supported on a sustained basis. 2, bringing risk analytics and risk management frameworks into the planning exercises and deploying the whole capability prowess of the insurance sector into those plans. And 3rd, domestic coordination to be deployed so plans could be done better. All of this, just to close, wrapped around the recognition that these 9 mechanisms, and I can just broadly mention some of those. You have UNDP, UNEP, you have the Green Climate Fund, NDC partnership. There is a NAP, NAP platform or governance platform. So, and a couple of others. There's the LDC, the Least Developed Countries Fund. So there are multiple mechanisms there. What's gonna be the trigger that force them to come together and have a conversation on how they better coordinate and complement each other? And whether, by doing that, they will be able to align for those 3 huge gaps that are in the system of national adaptation plan right now. So with that, I'll stop. I'll just turn a final round of comments from each of you. And I think we'll have, between 2 or 3 minutes per each of us to make a comment about that, whether that responds to you, whether you're seeing that there's another gap in the system that you should be elevating. And finally, what I would like is, make a final round of just a couple of closing words for each of you once we're done with this round. So I'll start in the middle and then go to the sides. So we'll start with Anuja.
Thank you, Jorge. I think it's very helpful to hear you identify the gaps. I think at a high level, from our perspective, national adaptation plans are a very helpful and important framework under which for us to start developing solutions and having important conversations. I think governments, as they develop their own concepts, are then at the right place for us to be able to come in and develop ideas. So I think at a high level, national adaptation plans are a very important signal for private sector players like us to get involved. One thought that comes to mind is understanding the timing. When is an adaptation plan at a good moment for a player like us to come and help insert all sorts of finance mechanisms into that plan? And as you know, it's a very complex process across many stakeholders. So as I think about that gap, I think timing is helpful. When are they ready, and how can we connect those dots as you're thinking about the many 9 different groups that are supporting that adaptation plan? And I think the only other thing I might add is, as I think about all those various agencies, UNDP, UNEP, all of them, one of the things that I think is difficult about their priorities, and we work with each of them in different ways, is their lens is completely different. They lead with something different. If it's UNDP, it might be a risk strategy, whereas UNEP might be coming in a very different angle. And so is there a way to align them on what are we leading with? Because they all lead from their own institutions, and I imagine that makes it difficult for them to coordinate because they're leading with a different first priority. They may all align once you get to their 3rd and 4th priorities, but their first priority might be something that's slightly different, just given the specialized nature of the institution. So just a few thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't have really a comment beyond yours. I think that to me the issue first is this connection with the private sector, and maybe I don't have a comment. No, I don't have an answer to that. Just to point to that disconnection, and it's really troubling for us because if the goal is to have a very inclusive process that also involve investments from the private sector, still tricky for the private sector to understand what it is. And now I'm not kidding when I tell you that I do report to the CEO of a company that is a trader. And every time I try to explain to him what is the case for adaptation, it's impossible. I haven't been able to penetrate that for a trader. I tried with insurance, you're paying too much insurance, you will save money, oh, that's a cost. That's not return. Or, you know, you're gonna save on infrastructure because right now infrastructure, it will be destroyed, that's a cost. You're gonna save life of people who are gonna work with you, the people in the mines, that's a cost, we'll find a way. So I haven't been able, and I'm not unique when I talk to colleagues in the private sector, how do you connect this? So to me, that's, if the goal is to bring the private sector into this discussion, this is still a gap that has not been solved. And I haven't heard, I don't have an answer. Let's be very humble about it, but I haven't heard yet in any fora the answer for that. So once we find the answer for that, I think we'll make a lot of progress. And the second one, just quickly, is because there's no central entity that's dealing with all adaptation in many countries, one of the challenges that I face when I go as a philanthropy is that there's multiple layers of implementers, small NGOs, large NGO, international NGOs, local agencies, private sector, consulting firms that are offering services or programs that say, oh, my program fits the National Adaptation Plan. But then when you go and talk to the government of Peru, they have never heard about this entity. And it could be large NGOs or big, well-known consulting firms. So we're having this parallel market beyond the 5 or 9 entities that you mentioned that has been created around NAPs, where it's implementing or advising governments about, I'll do the NAP that we're gonna get you funding to Jeff, or et cetera, et cetera. So I think those two, private sector disconnection and this multiplicity of layers or big black market that has been created around NAPs. Again, no solution. It's just pointing it to it.
Thank you. Christopher, and then we'll go with Ventica.
Yeah, sure. I'll be brief. Maybe just a quick build on some of that, because again, working for a private company, I have similar challenges inside. Honestly, whether I use the word mitigation or adaptation or resilience, I get blank stares in many, many cases. So I have to tailor my internal conversations very concretely to whoever I'm talking to, whether it's a procurement person, whether it's a finance person, whether it's a marketeer. They all require a little bit different translation at times. Lately, oddly enough, resilience has become a bit of a tag line of sorts. I don't think they always know what they mean when they say the word, but nonetheless, it's become a little trendy, so I try and take advantage of that. But I think it's about the outcome, right? What is the outcome intended that gets the attention of this particular private sector? And it may vary across the private sector, right? We're not going to be all unique in this. But I think countries have to think about, you know, what is the outcome that I want? How do I translate that to different parts of the private sector? And then, as you mentioned also, when do they come in as a part of this process? Are you just going to put a plan in front of them and say, here it is? I know this is hard, and I see this varies across country to country. Well, obviously, they all deal with the private sector in different ways. I'm from the U.S. originally, so we're very open doors, typically, you know, to talk to the private sector. That gets, when I go to my Europe, and I work in France now, so when I talk to my French colleagues about that, or any European colleague, they kind of snicker at that. Well, you U.S. people, you know, you're too open to the private sector. So it depends, right? You have to develop your own process, your own way of doing it. And then what does that mean? Does it translate into durable policy that actually sticks around, or is it just a plan? So again, what are those incentives from the institutional players to actually put some money, not just in the capacity building side of it, but the implementation side? So it's complex, it's difficult. Maybe one other quick word, I can look at this also. I used to work in government. I worked in the Obama administration and the US government for over a decade. I think we're put together our plan in 2015, 2016. I think one thing we did well, looking back, it's relative, right? That was 10 years ago now. But one of the things that we did well, it was an all-across government effort. And you know, I'm sure there's things we could have done better, but we did, I think, a decent job of bringing all the key players of government to the table and forcing them all to plan together. It gave them some ownership, number one. They could compete a little bit over budget and resources and things like that, but we internally at least tried to break down silos in the development of some of the work. Now, of course, things change from administration to administration, but I think there were some good learnings from that overall.
Sure,
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going from the middle to the sides.
Yeah, I actually really wanted to talk a little bit more of the point which you made, Chris. So I come from India, and we are not known for being the easiest government to deal with. And I come from the private sector, so I spent 25 years in the private sector. But I think one of the biggest things which really resonated with me was the domestic coordination or the lack thereof, right? I mean, for example, in my country, water, there used to be a separate water ministry, a separate irrigation and agriculture ministry, and then there was one more. And it was impossible because water runs across all of those. So, if you talk about different regulators, right, like the insurance regulator, securities regulator, then you make it even more complicated. So I think the domestic coordination really resonated with me, and that is key. But I also wanted to come back to Peru and give talk a little bit more about the example, because I think being very clear about what you need from each actor, it also helps. So last year we worked with COFIDE and helped them raise 100 million soles from the domestic market. So the local insurance companies, local asset managers, and other entities raise that money. And our role, and this money was on lent to 7 cajas. And our role was actually providing the capacity building help to the cajas so that they could do water and sanitation lending. So, they were very targeted with what they wanted. And that was our sweet spot. So being very clear on what different actors can come with and what is their sweet spot in terms of providing that particular help, I think that really helps. And using those proof points and then, scaling them. Yeah.
Being Peruvian, I have the benefit of knowing what COFIDE and cajas are. So COFIDE is a national development bank, and cajas are like, cooperative banks. Thank you for that example. So we'll move to Wim, and then we'll close with Peter, and then prepare for your 1 minute final pitch, just to close with some reflection, and then we'll move to David.
Sounds good, thank you. Maybe if you look at the 3 gaps and just to rank them in order, the capacity building, risk framework, domestic coordination, I think the one in the middle, the risk framework, is kind of the key, because if you get to solve that one, you will start to get capacity that is easily absorbed, and once other governments or governments see what is happening, they'll start coordinating as well. And there's some cross-fertilization ongoing as well, as we, for example, talk with central bank in Brazil, and there's like a couple organizations, the National Green or the Network of Green Financial coordination, they do exist. So I think actually the picture you painted, I think, is actually a little bit worse than how you painted it. I think the gap is actually worse, because even with these groups, or take the DFIs, who are all committed non-economic actors, in addition to obviously economic as well, but even I tried to coalesce all of them into kind of one strategy, and I lost a couple nights of sleep over that, because it is just hard how they're all different. They all want something else. There all is a different, emphasis on something, and so actually, I'll save that for my last minute. But so maybe the risk framework and kind of the jargon, or the around what are we talking about and what is actually most important.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I agree with everything that was said, and maybe to put another, I was thinking a lot about the coordination piece as well, and how important that is, and the importance of creating partnerships across. So again, thinking about financial institutions, they're not adaptation experts. They never will be. We can't expect them to be, right? It's not their role. We need that partnership, not just financing, but at the technical level between climate players and inclusion players. Same for the climate actors in this space. No one is asking in the Ministry of Environment to design financial solutions. That's not their skill set. It shouldn't be their skill set. But those partnerships and that collaboration doesn't happen on its own, by itself, right? When I think of what adaptation requires at household level, I think that people need 3 things. And financing is the last of them. Financing standalone doesn't do anything. First of all, you need information about what are your risks and what are adaptation responses that you might take to those risks. And then you need to be able to weigh those adaptation responses and pick one, simply put. Second, you need the solution provider to give you whatever you need to implement that adaptation response. So if you need irrigation, if that's the solution. If there's no irrigation vendor around you in your market that can sell you what you need, then financing is not going to help you, right? So those two pieces need to be in place before financing even becomes relevant. And those things don't happen spontaneously by themselves. That's where I think NAPS can play a key role in trying to take a more proactive approach to defining those spaces and making all three pieces come together. Yeah.
1 minute, final word.
1 minute. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is that obviously I talk a lot about inclusion in this context, and what I want to emphasize is that that is not a nice to have. It is not a buzzword that we want to include in our strategies. It is at the core of what we're trying to do with the adaptation agenda. So leaving it out, even in a 3-minute pitch of a national adaptation plan, is actually no small thing. It's a pretty big deal that we are not hearing that word and we are not hearing that spirit in all these things. The reality is adaptation finance is nowhere near getting money into the hands of the people who need to do the adapting on the ground. And that, you know, of course we need funding for resilient infrastructure and all the rest of it, but it's no substitute for actually getting resources to those people so they can do what they need to do. We are nowhere close to that. And it's not surprising because the current architecture was never designed to do that in the first place. Good news is there is an architecture that was designed to do that. There's a whole sector developed over half a century. It's called inclusive finance. It used to be called microfinance. Specifically designed to take global impact capital, translate into small ticket impact finance directly in the hands of people. It is crazy when you step back and think about it, that inclusive finance has not been a core part of the climate finance architecture from the beginning. And we're as guilty as missing that as anybody else, right? But when you step back and think about the challenges and the opportunities here, it's obvious that these two spaces need to be much more closely integrated. And we're here to do our part in making that happen. That's not just a matter of impact, by the way. It is also a matter of resource mobilization. We talk a lot about the need for more financing for adaptation, notably private capital, of which there's very little. The inclusive finance space, small local business banks around the world have an outstanding portfolio of $1.5 trillion that they are lending to people and small businesses around the world. Almost none of that is adaptation oriented today. That also speaks to the enormous opportunity that is just staring us in the face if we can figure out a way for local financial systems, inclusive financial institutions to just play a bigger role in the adaptation agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. That was a bit more than a minute, but we'll give it to you.
I can take very few because I was just going to say all that Peter's already said. But I'll make two very quick points. One, water, and which is why I really liked when Peru, the minister talked about it. Often it's really mind-boggling to us when countries and corporations talk about climate adaptation and resilience and don't talk about water, because if you think about it, all of us face climate change through water. And so keeping that at the center and keeping the most vulnerable populations in mind. And to the point which you were making about the network of financial institutions, we have 200 such partners all across the world, and they've cumulatively lent more than $7 billion to households and to small businesses for water and sanitation. So, 30 seconds.
I think two quick things. One, I think prevalent by all of us here, but I think at both a local and international level, private sector is very much leaned into this work. And I think the key issue is how to engage, when to engage, and in what's the most effective way to engage. But I think at a high level, it's encouraging to see so much interest from the private sector on figuring out how to make that investment real and long-term and sustainable. But I think alongside that, as we think about national adaptation plans and private sector, the one thing that I feel is that when we're thinking about our work is aligning incentives across the entire value chain. If you can align incentives, both financial and non-financial incentives across the entire value chain, you're developing solutions that will be long-term, will be sustainable, because it's in everyone's benefit to continue doing that work. And then we think about that at both the small scale level in one cooperative in one community, all the way up to national adaptation plans, for example. So.
Yes. So from my end, position us as an investment case, not just policy documents. I think that's at the core of what we wanted to do with the pitches today. So a clear value proposition, a good cost-benefit analysis, and good pipeline development so that private sector can jump into very specific actionable things. So that's one. And the next three are local ownership, super important. Local ownership, super important. And local ownership, super important.
I think this works. I'll try and be very simple and also sum up a little bit what I've already said, which is for us as an agri-food company, we need to be investing in our farming supply chains. This has been a dramatic change for Danone over the last decade. We are much more of a direct investor with our farming partners more and more, and this is increasing every year for a whole number of reasons: risk, sustainability, just longevity of a supply chain, frankly. As I mentioned, we often aren't the ones that need the financing. It's the farmers on the ground that need the financing. Having microloans is definitely a piece of it, but again, if we created a big pot of microloans and we don't have the technical assistance training to accompany that, the microloans aren't going to be as successful as they otherwise could. So it's a very complicated bit. And I'm going to be very provocative with a simple example. Any one of the 20 countries which we have active agricultural supply chains, if any one of them came and said, here's $1, a euro, a pound, whatever the currency is, and we'd like you to match it to go to farmers, you could get our attention. We would be there. It's actually quite simple.
Sure. So to really entice, I think, the private capital in adaptation, which is something I've been trying to do for 2 or 3 years now, with some success, but a lot less than I had envisioned, 3 years ago. You need to really create an asset class. Now, when you think about being a CIO at an insurance company in Germany or so, you make the pitch, they're all happy, this looks good, that makes sense. But here, talk to my person in the fixed income side. He does IG credit. So you do the pitch like, well, this is more leaning towards private markets. Why don't you talk to my colleagues in private markets? It's like, oh, I only do private markets in developed markets. Can you? We don't do this. So you go around and around, and so to really, maybe it's too early for adaptation. Doesn't mean that you cannot do it, but maybe you make it part of a bigger sustainable investing, which is what I think the trend is. But the biggest hurdle actually is still education of those CIOs, how they understand the asset class or the opportunity set, for which we, de facto really need a lot more discussions and a lot more engagement, including, discussions like this one. So I give it a 5.
Thank you. And while we, let me invite David Nicholson, who is Chief Climate Officer for Mercy Corp, to answer one very simple question, why are we rewriting the script about all of this? And I'll just give one more round of applause to our panelists.
Great, thank you. I feel like I've been given an impossible task here to try and summarize something that we've all heard and put it all together at a time when everyone's probably desperate for their afternoon caffeine. But stay with me, I'll be very brief, I promise you. First of all, so at Mercy Corp, we've been working on community resilience for many, many years, and I think that brings the appropriate mix of humility and optimism that is necessary, and I'm sure many of you in the room that work on these issues have the same feeling. It is reassuring to see so much more adaptation and resilience conversation at New York Climate Week, and the same we'll see at COP. The Resilience Hub used to be very lonely at these events, and now there's a lot more. It does mean, to I think Chris's point earlier, you hear a lot of people using the language when they don't know what they mean. Before coming here, I was at an event where I heard two corporate leaders on stage, and I counted. Between the two of them, they used the word community resilience 26 times. And I don't think, if you actually listen to what they're saying, it was connected to their point whatsoever. It was just thrown in there a bunch. So we do have to be a little bit careful about this. And that is why the NAPs are so important. The NAPs are important because they land specificity on what is happening, what is at the country level, what is needed to be done, and then what is needed done, what does the government want to do, what do the key stakeholders want to do, and then from there we can start getting into these interesting discussions around the private sector and the role, which is so important. And I think sort of the key question here is, how do we get more private money into adaptation? I think that's kind of that's why we need to rewrite the script, right? We have to rethink how to do this because there is not enough money, and we know that. So a little while ago, Mercy Corps commissioned a report as part of our, we did some research with a bunch of partners as part of our work as the Zurich Climate Resilience Alliance to look at this very question. There's a couple of things I want to pour forward from that, and then I'll just leave a couple of remarks on looking forward to COP. So one really important thing that came out of that piece of work was this idea that sort of current policies, if maximized, these targets of a total of 15% of adaptation and resilience investments by 2035 could be private investment. 15%, that is not most. 15 is much, much less than 85. And I feel like this is really, really important to emphasize because, 5 or 6 years ago would be, at events like this talking about more private investment in adaptation, and people would be like, I don't know, that's all public money. I don't think there's any room for the private sector. It's flipped so much now that I was at an event at COP last time when everyone thought you were going to get an 8-to-1 private investment money from $8 if $1 of public money is put in, and it's absolute nonsense. Particularly when you start getting into least developed countries, where that 15% is going to be more like 5%. So it's really, really important to remember that not all, not most, not even anywhere clear to most of adaptation will be funded by private investment. But there are areas that can, and those areas that can, we have to get really, really focused on and really, really specific as much as possible. Get this pipeline of opportunities out there. You heard lots of great advice on how we do that. One other point that I want to pull forward from that report is the thing that Peter thankfully emphasized many times and really clearly was this idea of inclusion. Private investment requires really clear policy environments, right? We need enabling policy. That can happen at the global level. That has to happen at the national government level, and that policy has to ensure equity and inclusion of adaptation activities wherever the money's coming from, right? Fundamentally important and not always easy to do when you start pulling in private money. So making sure that policy stuff is really, really focused on that issue at the national level is really important. So those are a couple of things that the report that we did pulled forward. The other final part was just this innovation pipeline in country, right? Who is funding that innovation pipeline in country? Because these ideas have to be pilot tested. There's a huge role for philanthropy here. We talk about public money, we talk about private money. There is a huge role for philanthropy because it can take risks. It's not taking near enough risks. The amount of philanthropy going to adaptation is pitiful. And it needs to be much, much bigger, and there's such an important role to play here because we know philanthropy can take more risk than public money can. So there's a really important role to be played there as well. So then looking forward, I think trying to think about this question of, all right, we've got COP coming up, these big moments to talk about. What are we hoping to see from there to help continue to advance this topic? I thought Dan's opening remarks are really encouraging. If Brazil can really pull forward a COP that puts adaptation on an equal footing with mitigation, that will be a huge step forward. And I certainly think Brazil is sort of the perfect context within which to really talk about and unpack the co-benefits. Many investments in mitigation and adaptation belong together, particularly in tropical forest locations. So I have some optimism there, and I think we can see, if we are able to elevate this discussion and have a real, continue this real conversation about how do we get the public money up as much as possible so that we can truly stimulate the private investment we need, because it's not going to happen by magic, and there's not enough money right now to do that. So that's an important part of this conversation. And I think there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of distrust from those countries who are not the big polluters, and they need to see this money coming to the table. Otherwise, I really worry that the UNFCCC process starts to fall apart if we don't really see commitment for, hitting that $1.3 trillion that we talked about, setting the target out at the last COP. We didn't get there. We want to this time. So that's a really important part of this to come. So just to leave you with a couple of thoughts on what is the vision for adaptation finance into the future? How does it need to look like? Public money as the backbone, right? That has to be there. Public money comes in many different flavors, many different shapes. There's lots of very creative, innovative ways of using public money, but it has to be the backbone. If you have that, we can have good pipeline development for innovation of ideas at the country and regional level. The ways that invite lots of the cool new insurance mechanisms that are out coming together, or lots of other private-led solutions will have a place to enter when you get that pipeline and policy environment set up. And then finally, philanthropy coming in to help build that pipeline of investable projects and take the risk. I will leave you there.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your patience. We're now on break. But just draw your attention to the art that has been being painted right there. Please visit it, enjoy, and see if it reflects what we discussed. And also just, there's a Deming piece of art on the back where you can put your phrase about what climate resilience means for you. So please feel free to do that as well. So thank you so much for the session and for being here with us and paying attention. Thank you.